right. Just check. Just a sec. Mm, I'm just looking for something. Yes, go ahead. Oh, okay. So last time I said I would go over these three not purifications, three contradictions again, being free from the three contradictions. Benjamin Sundaba doesn't really say that much about it. Um, there's this one passage. Well, first of all, there are different views from different schools, but then having refuted, or not from different schools, but from different scholars, and so going through them, then at the end, Benjamin Sundaba posits our own system, saying again that this like a Buddhist scripture that is a kind of a reliable testimony. It is unimpaired by direct perception, so it's not contradicted by direct perception, not impaired by inference based on the power of the fact, and is not contradicted by inference based on oh no, sorry. It's not contradicted by direct perception. It's not contradicted by an inference based on empirical facts, and it's not contradicted by inference based on testimony, reliable testimony, which means basically there are no contradictions between earlier and later assertions, contradiction between its own explicit and implicit words, and so forth. Okay, that's all it says.
I actually had a doubt with regards to that.
Pardon?
I actually had a doubt with regards to that.
Okay, well, what is that? What is your
If
doubt?
if there's a method, because if two inferences by the power of belief contradict each other, is there a method to verify which one of those is like the one that is authentic and which one is the one that is not?
Well, usually it's the power of reasoning. So the power, no, it's through the inference of the power of the fact or the power of empirical fact. So you check which of the two holds up to reasoning. That's how the Nagarjuna, Arya Nagarjuna, how Arya Asanga and so forth did it when they divided the teachings of the Buddha into provisional and definitive teachings. I mean, they figured out which teachings, for instance, can be taken literally and which ones not, can be accepted literally or not. So you base it on empirical facts. So if the Buddha says somewhere there is a self, there is an autonomous self, well, that's contradicted by reasoning.
I see. So if you have two,
Contradictory, like apparently, I mean, apparent contradictions, though it's said clearly in the text, the Buddha has no contradictions in the sense that one just simply can't be taken literally.
mm,
Yeah, so that there's another purpose behind the Buddha saying such and such. But yeah, if there's an apparent contradiction, then you use reasoning,
I see.
yeah, to find out which one is acceptable.
Mm.
I also went back to this quote. Venerable Teacher asked about one of the quotes, the last quote in Science and Philosophy on inferential cognition, when it says, because trustworthy statements are generally non-deceptive. I don't think that translation is correct. I mean, I went back to um, Gyaltsabje's commentary explaining these two lines. And in this commentary, it basically says, well, Mastan Dignaga says that regarding the statement that scripture is a valid cognizer, I mean, it's or valid cognition, or it's valid, let's put it that way, that scripture is valid. It follows that this does not refer to just any scripture. I mean, it's valid cognizer as in like, um, I guess he means it's a valid, I mean, can be validly understood to be non-deceptive. It doesn't refer just to any scripture, but it refers to The trustworthy speech of the Buddha that reveals the extremely hidden. That's how I would translate it. So Dignaga talks about valid cognition or validity when it comes to particular scriptures, but he talks about being non-deceptive, understanding that they're non-deceptive. But this is from the point of view here of very hidden phenomena, extremely hidden phenomena. And then it goes on to say, mm, because because the two objects of knowledge revealed by the Buddha's speech, so the two objects of knowledge, which means manifest and slightly hidden objects of knowledge, and a general statement corresponding to the Buddha's speech. So here, the very hidden, they are taught to be inferred as not being deceptive concerning their own intended meaning. So here it's this general statement. It's saying that it's the general statement. So it doesn't mean generally, but it's referring to general statements by the Buddha, the contents of which are extremely hidden. These are to be inferred, these are inferred to be non-deceptive. That's how Gyaltsab seems to explain it. So it doesn't say generally. It just has the word general in there, but I guess from what Gyaltsab says, it's basically this particular quote is saying trustworthy statements, colon, like statements. So what about them, basically? So it's like a colon. It says ni. Ni is often used like a colon. Trustworthy statements. So they are to be inferred with regard to certain general Buddhist statements Buddhist statements the Buddha made in general, and implied here is, of course, they refer to extremely hidden phenomena that are expressed. So they are to be inferred to be non-deceptive. I just don't think that generally is the right translation. But honestly, it's very difficult to translate
Mm.
Pramanavartika. I mean, sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's harder, especially when you follow Gyaltsab's explanation and you want to base the translation on what Gyaltsab says, it becomes sometimes really difficult. But then the text in general is not easily understood. But I don't think it says like generally non-deceptive. I mean, that would be implying that some are deceptive, which of course doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's that. And I looked up other commentaries as well, but I couldn't really find I mean, I got a way in which, yeah, this ji in Tibetan was translated in any other way.
Mm.
Then going back to French recognizers. Now we've covered the first one, and yeah, unfortunately, it leads to more questions than answers. But as I said, it is debated a lot, and it's just really hard to answer it. But then let's move on to the second type of inferential cognizer that is mentioned here. What is it? Where is it? On page 80. So it says that the small print here explains the definition of an inferential cognizer through renown or through popular convention is a determinative knower which, depending on its base, a correct sign of renown is incontrovertible with respect to its object of comprehension. A terminological suitability. An illustration sounds weird. An illustration is the inferential consciousness that realizes it is suitable to express the rabbit possessor by the term moon. Okay, so the term is moon, and then rabbit possessor is just another word for moon. So that can be called moon, the rabbit possessor, or this object up in the sky, if you want. It can be called moon because it is an object of thought. So, in other words, whatever exists can potentially be called moon. Can be, because it's not inherent in the word moon to mean
Mm.
that object up in the sky. It's not in the nature of that object to mean to no, it's not inherent in the word moon to refer to the object in the sky. So it's basically saying, and Lati Rinpoche explains it quite beautifully. whereas I mean, in contrast, we can say, for instance, water, it's in the nature of water to be wet, or in the nature of fire to be hot, but it's not in the nature of a particular word to mean such and such. Okay. So this is actually quite important, especially from the Prasangika school point of view, going to a labeling, that there's nothing inherent in a particular object. There's nothing in the nature of that, but that needs to be discussed further. It's a little bit, it's not immediately that clear. Anyway, let's just read it first. So all consciousnesses are produced in dependence on a basis. The basis for this type of inference is a sign of renown. In other words, it operates on an object which is established through the power of renown in the world. Okay, all consciousnesses are produced in dependence on a basis. Yes. So in general, that's true. And then in the case of this particular inference or this particular inferential cognizer, what is the basis for this type of inference? It is a sign of renown or of popular convention. The illustration given above stated in the syllogism, in the syllogistic form, would be the subject, the rabbit possessor, so the object up in the sky, whatever we want to call it, is suitable to be expressed with the term moon, or it can be called moon, because of being an object of thought, being an object of a conceptual consciousness. A similar statement can be made with regard to anything. The subject John is suitable to be expressed with the term moon because of existing among objects of thought. That's how people end up with nicknames. I don't know anyone who's called Moon, but of course a lot of Tibetans are called Moon. Dawa. Dawa is just another word for moon. Or even in, I guess in Hindi, probably Chandra, right? Chandra is a popular name.
Even Chanda.
Pardon?
Even Chanda. Both are the same. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good word.
Uh, so in other words, it's suitable to call John anything, moon, sun, or any other name one wants to designate to them. And thus in Tibet, children were often given names such as Buddha, giving, ethics, patience, effort, wisdom, and so forth. Yeah. Jimba. Chuchum, yeah. I mean, in English, I understand you use names like Faith, Patience. I know a girl from the US, for instance, called Faith, Patience, and so forth. Wisdom, I haven't met anyone called Wisdom, and so forth. Also, it is suitable to change names. The reason for the suitability of expression is simply the subjects existing among object of thought. Yeah, so in other words, they're all objects of conceptual mind, and therefore they can be called that. Any object that can be thought of is suitable to be designated with any name. Whatever one wants to call an object is all right because names do not inhere in objects. They're not innate in their objects. Or the meaning of a particular name is not inherent in that name. One can understand this through the example pot, the name designated to a bulbous flat-based water holder. A bulbous thing's being a pot is not something which is established as its own mode of being from its mere production. Rather, someone initially affixed the name, the verbal convention pot, to a bulbous flat-based water holder, and this came to be renowned as its actual name. However, one could just as easily call it something else, for instance, woolen cloth. And in time, with repeated usage, when one said woolen cloth, the image appearing to one's mind would be that of a bulbous flat-based water holder. Yeah. The fact that now, when we say pot, a bulbous flat-based water holder appears to our minds, and when we say woolen cloth, a fabric woven from sheep's wool, appears is merely by the power of the predispositions of expression. Those predispositions established by our usage of expressions. So it's interesting, like when you learn about Buddhism first, you hear a word and it's like, don't even know what that refers to, or it feels so odd, especially when it's kind of like Buddhist hybrid English. It feels so odd. It feels so inappropriate. But then you hear it once or twice, a few times, predispositions are left on your mind, and it's fine. No longer any issue with that term. It is not by the power of the external object, but by that of association, and this association can be changed. This is not the case with qualities inherent in an object, for example, to a direct perceiver apprehending a fire. The hot and burning appears, and the wet and moistening, the qualities of water, do not. This is because heat abides as the nature of fire. It's within the nature, It's the nature of fire, yes. An inference through renown is a consciousness realizing that it's suitable to express an object with the term just because it exists among objects of thought. Such a consciousness is incontrovertible with respect to its object of comprehension, a terminological suitability. In the instance cited, rabbit possessor itself is not a terminological suitability, but the suitability of expressing the rabbit possessor with the term moon is one. Okay, so rabbit possessor is not a terminological suitability, but the suitability of expressing the rabbit possessor with the term moon is one. So it's the term. The term rabbit possessor can be applied, I guess. I mean, why would rabbit possessor not be suitability? If Vladimir Rimchi is referring to the term itself, of course that would be suitable. The term rabbit possessor. What is he saying here? Itself is not a terminological suitability, but the suitability of expressing the rabbit possessor with the term moon is one.
I think what he's saying is that
it's not a name.
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah. All right, rabbit possessor not being a name, it's not a terminology. Okay. Is that the rabbit possessor is suitable to be called the moon rather than saying that the moon is suitable to be called the rabbit possessor? Not the rabbit. The reason is that the example is stated. Okay, so it goes one way, but of course it could also go the other way. But here in this example, it doesn't say the subject, take the subject, the moon, it is suitable to be called rabbit possessor because it's an object of thought. It could go both ways, but here it just goes one way in the example above. And so why is this the case? Rather than saying that the moon is suitable to be called the rabbit possessor, is that there are many different objects designated by the term moon. Quicksilver, a young girl's face. Yeah, like moon-like. They say it's like she looks, her face is like the shape of a moon, the kind of her fair complexion and so forth. Camphor, kind of medicine, and the orb in the night sky. So the orb in the night sky refers to what we call the moon. The point being made is that because the moon exists among object of thought, it can be called anything. Okay. All right. Now, what does that tell us? I think it's important to go through this because it's a really helpful way to get prepared for the Prasangika school, which says phenomena are merely labeled. On the other hand, it also shows us how we can get confused about phenomena being merely labeled, in that sometimes people think to be merely labeled means you can just call anything anything, which seems to be what this is saying here. I mean, yes, actually, of course, there's no rule that you cannot call the moon moon or in any other language give it a different name. But that doesn't mean that once that has been done, there's not a certain consistency. So you don't keep changing the name, first of all. And also, there is a dependence on the object of the basis of imputation, the basis of designation. Now, if we decide, we means you personally, if you're just one person, you create your own language, or as a group of people, kind of deciding, I mean, it doesn't mean that we all come together and decide kind of a vote which word we're going to use, but a word is used and everyone kind of agrees with this and it's used in that particular way. So say moon, for instance, or table. In the case of table, there's a valid basis of designation. There's a certain characteristic or certain definition that we assign or that we understand a table to have. And once the name is applied, then it depends on whether the object of designation is given. No, it depends on the object of designation whether the term is given or not. So it's not that random. But what they're saying here is simply it's not inherent in the term, and it's not inherent in the moon to be called moon, and it's not inherent in the word moon that it refers to the object moon. Am I making sense? Yeah. But of course, there's some debate in the Prasangika school in particular. it's kind of interesting when we talk about something being in the nature of something else. I mean, what does inherent existent mean anyway? What does it mean to be innate in something, to be intrinsic, I should say, to be intrinsic in something, to be innate? It actually means to be in the nature of that object. In fact, the Tibetan word inherent existence actually means nature. It's the word for nature. And
Mm.
it's used all the time. Oh, it's in the nature of fire to be hot, for instance. Now you use it in an ultimate context and you use it in a conventional context. In a conventional context, you use it the way we would use it in English. It's in the nature of water to be wet, for instance. But it's not in the nature of water to be hot, as an example. But then if you use it in the ultimate context, it's different. There are other terms that are used in a similar way. On a conventional level, we talk about independence. I'm not sure I think I said that in your class. For instance, we talk about the independence of a country, but that doesn't literally mean that it's totally independent. It's in relation to certain affairs, political and economic and so forth, that we say a country is independent, but it's not an absolute independent country. Or we talk about objectivity. Let's look at this objectively, which doesn't mean you literally don't use the mind to view something, which is impossible, but rather it means without certain negative emotions, without anger, without attachment. That means looking at something objectively. So it's only in relation to that. Similarly, we can use that with nature. It is in the nature of fire to be hot. It's in the nature of water to be wet. But when you use it in the ultimate sense, things are a little different. Because if I ask you, is it in the nature of water to be hot? You would say no, it's not. Simply because being hot or not depends on many other factors. You need a a heating source in order, you need some, I don't know, gas or an open fire or whatever in order to warm the water. Therefore, it is not inherently hot. But then water, in order to be wet, also depends on something other than itself. It depends on other factors. It depends on hydrogen, which is not water, two hydrogen, one oxygen, H2O. Yeah. Um, so two molecules of hydrogen and one molecule of oxygen. So that's neither of these are water, right? None of the hydrogen molecules nor the oxygen molecule are water, but it depends on these three molecules to be water, or it depends on um, a body consciousness to perceive it as wet. I mean, wetness is an object of a body consciousness. Therefore, when you look at the Prasangika school from the point of view of ultimate analysis or ultimate perception of things, I mean, kind of reflecting on emptiness basically, then is it in the nature of water? Is it inherent in water to be wet? No. So in the to be inherent or to be in the nature of means to be in the nature in an absolute sense. You don't need to depend on anything. It's just in its nature. The same is true for like a table. It's in the nature of the table to be a table. It doesn't depend on anything. It's almost like it's shouting out at us, I'm a table, call me that. Right? And we have that sense, oh, I call this a table because it is already a table. While it is actually the other way around. It's only a table because we call it that. So we see it in exactly the opposite way. But hopefully you get a better sense, like when we talk about nature, like this word inherently, it's not a word that is used a lot in the English language. It's not like you keep saying, oh, it's inherent in them. We use more the word it's natural, it's in the nature and so on. And then we use it, of course, in a relative way. And that's how even in the Buddhist scriptures, it's used in the relative way. This country is independent. That is a valid Buddhist statement, because in a relative way, it is independent. In a relative way, we can look at a situation objectively. And in a relative way, it's in the nature of water to be wet. But in an absolute sense, there's no objectivity. So meaning not having to depend on anything, just objectively, just out there, nothing to do with the mind, or independence in the sense like doesn't need anything to exist, or inherent in it is in the nature. Water is in the nature of being water. Water doesn't depend on anything to be water. Or then we're talking about the object of negation of emptiness.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so it's really not, I mean, it's really hard to fully grasp, of course, the object of negation. But if you understand this aspect of like it's inherent in the object, it's in the nature of the object, in that absolute sense, that's all we're negating. That's how we look at things. There is a sense, at least how phenomena appear to us from a Prasangika school point of view, the object over there, it's almost like it's telling me I'm a table, I'm a cupboard, and so forth. It's got nothing to do with my mind. That's why we have sayings, and again, I'm going to keep repeating myself, but we have sayings such as beauty lies in the eye of the beholder because we keep forgetting. We keep forgetting. Otherwise, why would you have that phrase if we didn't forget? No, it seems that it's beautiful over there. It's got nothing to do with my mind. Beauty is out there. I think beauty is a good example, especially because we have that saying and it's used again and again because we keep forgetting. Emotionally, on an emotional level, it feels differently. Okay. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. It kind of is a preparation for us to understand, yes, things can be called anything. It's not inherent in the word, although it seems that way. Again, going back to shakshuka and what have you, calling someone paranta or samosa or whatever. I mean, that would be ridiculous for someone coming from India. That in other countries, I mean, my country calling someone a sausage. Oh, or what else? What is like a pretzel? Call someone a pretzel. I mean, that would be so ridiculous. But there's nothing inherent in the word, but it seems there is. It seems pretzel just refers to something you can eat, and it's definitely not something you would call your child. Yes, so therefore, understanding that's one of the and with some things it's easier than with others that it's not inherent in a name. It's very clear to us that the borders of countries that they're not inherent in that area. It's also pretty clear. It's upon agreement that I mean, just in this other class I taught, someone mentioned the border between Mexico and the US. But it still depends on something because there's not going to be in Africa or in Europe that border unless things really drastically change in the world. But no, the border between between Mexico and the US, it's at a particular area. It's not like that fixed, while with the table it's slightly different. So there are objects where it seems much more inherent in the object, like a table or the wetness of water. But then thinking of, for instance, things like castes or classes, as in the West, like belonging to a certain class, it's like it's this is there's really nothing found really from the side of the object. It's really just where your family is from or whatever. So with some objects it's more obvious, with some objects less obvious. But in particular here, when we talk about labeling, this is an interesting syllogism, I think, or an interesting inference. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think that is enough about the inferential cognizer through popular convention or through renown, unless you have any questions. No questions? Okay. Then let's look at the next kind of inference. So the definition of an inferential consciousness by the power of the fact or by empirical fact is a determinative knower which, dependent on its basis, a correct sign by the power of the fact is incontrovertible with respect to its object of comprehension, a slightly hidden phenomenon. An illustration is the inferential consciousness which realizes that sound is impermanent. Okay. So in this type of inference, the basis is a correct sign by the power of the facts, which is a reason that proves a slightly hidden phenomenon. Okay. Because an inferential cognizer by the power of the fact or by an empirical fact comprehends a meaning that abides in the object, the thing itself, that abides in the object, the thing itself. It understands an object which is established by the power of the thing itself. Okay, so this is again about, okay, here's something that's in the nature of the object, conventionally in the nature of the object. In general, there are two types of objects: those established by the power of the thing itself, and those established by the power of renown. So even on the conventional level, you wouldn't say it's in the nature of a moon to refer to the moon, or it's in the nature of the moon to be called moon. It could be called something else. Otherwise, you wouldn't have other different languages. So that's even in a conventional sense. But you would still say that being a product or being impermanent is in the nature of sound. Okay, so therefore we distinguish between those established by the power of renown and those established by the power of the thing itself. With regard to the first, hot and burning resides in the thingness of fire, resides in the fire, in the nature of fire itself. Another way of saying this is that hot and burning really exist with fire. So every time you have fire, it must be hot and burning. When one touches fire, no aspect other than that of hot and burning appears. Thus, the hot and burning is called an object that is established by the power of the thing. And again, yes, for us human beings, absolutely. If you have another species that every time they get closer to fire, they start getting really cold, having the sensation, then what is it for them? It's interesting, isn't it, when you think about it? I usually use the example of like someone from somewhere in Siberia who's just experienced minus 40 degree and coming to a place where it's like 0 degrees Celsius or plus 10, and someone from Delhi just after a hot summer. Those plus this 10-degree plus, 10-degree. For this Russian person, it'd be like, whoa, it's so hot. For someone from Delhi, they get out their woolies. So therefore, is it hot or is it cold? It depends. Can't say. Yeah. Okay. Another way of saying this is that hot and burning really exists with fire. When one touches fire, no aspect other than that of hot and burning appears. Yeah, you need to touch it. I mean, a stone, yeah, it gets hot, but only if we experience it, when it's too close to the fire. But the stone doesn't burn. It doesn't go, ooh, it's hot. So from the perspective of the stone, it doesn't happen. But it's again from the perspective of our consciousness, our body consciousness, that we perceive heat. Without a body consciousness, well, where does that heat come from? And even burning, it's merely labeled on the basis of, an object transforming. We label burning. Never mind. Anyway, so hot and burning appears. And thus, the hot and burning is called an object that is established by the power of the thing. So, in conventional terms, we say, yeah, it's in its nature. One can call fire the cleaner or the crested. Um, so like a crested having like some kind of, I don't know, some aspect that looks like, like on the crown, it has like, well, like we would say for a peacock has feathers on the top of its head, so it's crested. And fire with like the flames kind of appearing at the top of the fire or at the outer rims of the fire, you call it crested. You can call that crested. But it's being these are not established by the power of the thing. Pigs are also cleaners and peacocks are renowned as crested, but none of those terms um, are intrinsic in the object. So none of these terms, I mean, there's nothing intrinsic in the pig being a cleaner or a peacock, and likewise, sorry, nothing intrinsic in the pig being a cleaner, and the term cleaner being intrinsically used for a pig. Or natural, yeah, intrinsically, no, intrinsically is the wrong word. It can be called that, but it's not in its nature. It's not in its nature. It can be called crested. The peacock can be called crested, but it's not in its nature. They're just objects established by the power of renown in relation to fire. So going back to the fire being cleaner or crested being called that, is just because of, yeah, popular renown or popular convention. One can take sound as an example. The fact that it is produced or established as definite to disintegrate moment by moment, right from the time of its own production, is the mode of subsistence of sound. Yeah. So again, like I said earlier, conventionally we say it's in the nature of sound to be impermanent. Therefore, even Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have inconceivable powers, such as turning earth into gold, so they're said to have this power. Don't know how they do it. But anyway, so they have the power of turning certain materials into gold. Their powers are limited in that they do not have the power to change sound from being definite to disintegrate moment by moment into not so disintegrating. Yeah, so certain things can be, of course, changed, but its impermanence is unchanging. In fact, it's not even, some people think that everything is produced by karma. But an example is, for instance, the impermanence of sound. That was not the result of anyone's karma. Not everything is the result of karma. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, during many teachings in the past, he has stressed not everything is karma. For instance, the impermanence of sound, the lack of inherent existence of sound. So some of the most basic natural characteristics in a conventional sense, so take the impermanence, well, they are in the nature of this object, but it has nothing to do with anyone's karma. Therefore, an inference which realizes that sound is impermanent comprehends that fact through the force of the sounds being established in its own actuality as impermanent. All right, so that's the second division, the third, category of inferential cognizers. Yeah, this threefold division of inferential cognizers into those through belief, renown in the power of the fact, or through uh, reliable testimony, through popular convention and empirical facts, is made by the way of their entities. If one makes a division by way of their mode of production, there are two, prime and subsequent. There's no such thing as an inferential cognizer that is an awareness to which an object appears, but is not ascertained, since it must realize its object. Okay. Now I'm wondering whether I should go through the next section. This is all about Tariq, basically. I don't know. Have you read this part? Have you read page 83? Do you know what it's about?
Yeah. Amazing.
Do you want to go through it? I don't know. I mean, it's really hard for me to judge. It's not, of course, always better to have that understanding, to understand Pramanavartika, because it is all about reasoning and so forth. On the other hand, I'm worried we won't finish if we spend too much time on it, but I'll leave it up to you.
I think it's more important to that we can at some point do the mental factors and so on. So maybe and spend more time on that. So maybe we skip this.
Okay, we can skip it, and then if there's still time at the end, if everyone is in agreement, what Anastasia just said,
I think so.
I could leave some things that I think are less important in the context of Lorig, and if there's time, I'll add them later on. So 83 would be one, and we still have this difference between Vaibhashika in terms of arising in the aspect of the object or not. I wanted to write a short summary, but depending on how much time we have, we can actually go through it. Okay, great. Those are the two. Then we can start with subsequent cognizers, if that's okay with you. If you can go to science and philosophy, it's really not difficult. Even if you haven't read it, it's so easy because we've basically gone through it to a certain degree, and it's just, yeah, reviewing what we discussed earlier. It's on page, well, in my text is 319. I don't know if you
271.
271. Okay, great. All right, so subsequent cognition. Subsequent, and we'll read first, of course, science and philosophy, and then we'll go back to mind in Tibetan Buddhism. Subsequent cognition can be explained by way of the following illustration. So let's take the case of someone who has a valid inferential cognition, realizing that sound is impermanent. in that person's mind stream, later moments of the continuum of valid cognition observing that sound is impermanent are subsequent cognitions. The definition of a subsequent cognition is a cognition that realizes again by the force of a previous valid cognition an object already realized by the earlier valid cognition that induced it. Okay, we had that before. Even if I know, for instance, I've seen a vase today and then again I see it tomorrow, well, I wouldn't say that my perception of the vase tomorrow is induced by my perception today. So tomorrow it's again a valid cognition. But if it's, for instance, the first moment, like let's say an eye consciousness apprehending vase, knowing vase, realizing vase, then the conceptual mind that arises from that was induced by that eye consciousness, and it's therefore something that was already realized, and it's a subsequent cognition. Exposition of valid cognition says, since it apprehends the apprehended, that conventional cognition is not accepted to be valid cognition. So since it apprehends that which has already been apprehended, then that conventional cognition is not accepted to be valid cognition. This means that subsequent cognition, which is a conventional cognition remembering something, it exists conventionally, is a consciousness that through recollection apprehends the object that the earlier valid cognition that induced it had already apprehended and fully understood. Thus, it is subsequent cognition, but is not accepted to be valid cognition. When categorized, subsequent cognition has two types. Perceptual subsequent cognition, so subsequent cognition which is a direct perception, and conceptual subsequent cognitions. Examples of the first are subsequent perceptual sense consciousness. I don't even think you need to say perceptual subsequent sense consciousness, but okay. So just the second moment of an eye consciousness apprehending a pot. Yeah, it itself, an eye consciousness, whatever is an eye consciousness apprehending a pot or a vase, or apprehending a pot, never mind, I say pot. So whatever is an eye consciousness apprehending a pot is not necessarily a valid cognition, but it itself is said to be a valid cognition. An eye consciousness apprehending a pot, it itself is described usually as a valid cognition. And a subsequent perceptual mental consciousness, such as the second moment of a clairvoyant perception, knowing someone else's mind, well, that's also a subsequent cognition. Conceptual subsequent cognition is of two types. Oh, here it mentions, well, mental direct perception, for instance, clairvoyance. That hasn't really been mentioned much. But yeah, here it is. And then as to conceptual subsequent cognition, that is of two types. A conceptual subsequent cognition induced by a perception. So you have an eye consciousness first, or anyway, it'll be explained in a second. And a conceptual subsequent cognition induced by an inference. An example of the first is an ascertaining consciousness knowing blue. So a mind that realizes its object, an eye consciousness apprehending blue, that is induced. Oh, no, sorry. Ascertaining. No, I'm sorry. An ascertaining consciousness knowing blue is a conceptual mind. Yeah, ascertaining. Ascertainment is always a conceptual mind. I mentioned that before, like an ascertaining mind. So an awareness to which the object appears, but it's not ascertained. The ascertainment actually refers to the conceptual mind that follows. So an example of the first is a conceptual mind ascertaining blue, or an ascertaining consciousness knowing blue that is induced by sense perception apprehending blue or knowing blue. An example of the second, a conceptual subsequent cognition that was induced by an inference. So the example of that is the sound is an ascertaining of the sound is an example of the second, oh, not sound. An example of the second is an ascertaining consciousness knowing a pot to be impermanent that is induced by a valid inference realizing that a pot is impermanent. The above explanation of later moments of perception and inference as subsequent cognition is based on Dharmottara's explanatory commentary on the ascertainment of valid cognition. This text says, because the first moment of perception and inference, the first moment of perception, of a direct perception and of an inferential cognition, is able to engage the object through ascertaining the continuum of a thing able to perform a function, later ones that are not separate from the establishment and abiding of its continuum are not valid cognition. That's it. So really straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty easy. Okay.
Mhm.
And then let's look at mind in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, so here the definition is a little bit different. The definition of a that's on page 84. The definition of a subsequent cognizer is a knower which is not a prime cognizer and which realizes what has already been realized by a former cognizer, inducing it. But Ladi Rinpoche says there's a problem with this definition because a subsequent cognizer is an affirmative phenomenon. It's a positive and affirmative phenomenon, while the definition saying which is not a prime cognizer is a negation. It's a negative phenomenon, and therefore it cannot serve as the definition of a subsequent cognizer. So to avoid this problem, the definition being a negative phenomenon or a non-affirmative phenomenon, while the definiendum is an affirmative or positive phenomenon. Well, to avoid this problem, most other presentations of awareness and knowledge posit the definition of subsequent cognizer, a knower which realizes that which has already been realized. But that's a little difficult, being that which has been induced. So the definition we had in here in subsequent cognition, that actually works a little better because, for instance, if I realize a pot today and I realized it yesterday, that doesn't mean that that the eye consciousness that I generate today, or the eye consciousness that arises in my mind today is a subsequent cognition just because it realizes something I realized yesterday.
Mm.
Yeah. But my eye consciousness today hasn't been induced by my eye consciousness yesterday, which is why it is not a subsequent cognition. So adding, as in science and philosophy, adding that extra kind of phrase of having been induced, I think is a little clearer. Of course, you can always answer. It's a knower which realizes that which has already been realized. You can insist, no, the eye consciousness today is not one of those. Yes, it has realized something that was realized yesterday. Yes, it's a knower, but it's not a knower which realizes that which was. It feels a bit like cheating, but you can definitely say that. Yeah. Um, I find this definition preferable, Latrum, she says. There also some difficulty in the first definition with the part that says by the former prime cognizer inducing is, as will become clear later when the divisions of subsequent cognizers are explained. So here, Latrum, she has like a slightly different view on what does it mean to be induced. Yeah, the thing is, a lot of what we learn, of course, is a matter of opinion, and it's not that clear cut in a sense, well, simply because it's not inherent in the word induce to mean such and such. So some interpret the meaning of inducing this way and others in another way. So there
Mm.
are certain aspects that everyone agrees on, and Laturum, she beautifully explained that as part of the explanation on inferential cognition when he said, well, things such as it's impermanent or not, there's not much you can do about it. I mean, either it's changing or not. But whether you call it impermanent or not, or whether the term impermanent or permanent is used in a wider sense, that's a whole different matter. In fact, in some of the traditions, they say the Buddha's mind is permanent. In the Kagyu tradition, they say the Buddha's mind is permanent. And I was like, what? Oh, Buddha's mind, doesn't it change moment by moment? Oh, yeah, it does. So, here the meaning of permanent in this particular context, the way they used it was none of its qualities disintegrate. So the
Mm.
qualities basically remain the same. Therefore, they applied the term permanent. And because it's not inherent in the object to mean one thing and not the other, it worked perfectly well. Yeah. Okay. It works perfectly well to call it that. Yeah, it's not contradictory, it's not wrong. Okay, so then looking at the small print, when subsequent cognizers are divided, there are two, direct and conceptual subsequent cognizers. Yeah, the same as before. There are four direct subsequent cognizers: sense, mental, self-knowing, and yogic. Okay. Yeah, that also makes sense. We haven't really discussed direct perceivers in that way yet. I mean, we haven't discussed the reflexive knower much. It's not that difficult, and we won't take much time to do so. A sense direct subsequent cognizer is, for example, the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form. An example of a mental direct perceiver, mental direct one is the second moment of a mental perceiver in the continuum of his superior, which is apprehending a form. Uh-huh. Perceiver in the continuum, which is apprehending a form. Actually, it's said to be, uh, if it's a yogic direct perceiver, every moment is said to be a direct, is said to be a valid cognizer, and there are no subsequent cognizers. So this seems to be a little contradictory.
Krishna,
Yes?
I was memorizing some stuff from some definitions from the Yongsan Dutra, and it's
Yes.
in there as well. A yogic direct perceiver has two divisions, one of which is subsequent.
Yeah. Yes. It's all over. I mean, there are different commentaries that explain this. I mean, I'm more used to, you see, like this is the difference, for instance, Benjiso Darpa. Some of the textbook authors, they just explain it differently. A yogic direct perceiver, an omniscient mind, for instance, it's very clearly, maybe, I mean, I think the second moment of an omniscient mind is also, of course, a direct, a valid cognizer. So the omniscient mind, I don't think there's any disagreement. But then when it comes to a yogic direct perceiver, some would say, yeah, even the second, like the second, even the second moment is a valid cognizer, and then and others would say it isn't. You see, so it just depends. It depends on who you ask. You remember Pupujo and Jetsumba? Jetsumba, they say that valid cognition and a valid cognition and what was the other thing? Inferential, yeah. So an inferential valid cognition and an inferential cognition are synonymous. Therefore, only the first moment of an inferential cognizer apprehending impermanence or apprehending emptiness is a valid cognizer. The subsequent moments are not inferential cognizers, according to Pupujo and Jitsumba. Jitsun Chugi Gensen. Jitsun, yeah, Jitsun Chugi Gensen and Pupujo. So it's just a matter of opinion. Yeah. I mean, I'm not just opinion. I mean, well, there's a reason behind it, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, here Lati Rinpoche seems to be saying the same thing. A mental direct one is the second moment of a mental. I mean, what else would he mean? The continuum of a superior here means an Arya. And what else would he mean with a mental perceiver other than a yogic direct perceiver? Otherwise, he wouldn't have to say a superior being.
So then the division of direct subsequent cognizer of mental, so mental direct subsequent cognizer and yogic direct subsequent cognizer. This is a common locus of those two.
Well, that's why I'm surprised that Lati Rinpoche uses it that way. Because what else would he mean? So maybe that's his opinion and he just contradicted what was said earlier. Yeah, I can't say. I mean, because the above is based on Panchasona Dharma. There are four direct cognizers: sense, mental, self-knowing, and yogic. So whether it's a mistake or that's really his opinion, I really can't say. Yeah. So this text here by Geshe Jampe Gyatso is based on Panchasona Dharma's view. Therefore, it's very clear that a second moment of a yogic direct perceiver is still. Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. Of course, I'm seeing it the other way around. But actually, according to Benjamin Dakwa, it is a direct. It is a valid cognition. I was getting confused. So he's actually basing it on this small print. Yes. But the way I remember it, that the second moment is also a yogic direct is the second moment of a yogic direct perceiver is a valid cognition. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. But I guess even though Geshe Chambi Gyatso does base it on Benjamin Tapa, but maybe I just have it have a wrong memory. I just don't. Huh. I'm quite certain that I've heard that it's that the second moment is also.
Geshma, it is specific, though. It says an example of a yogic subsequent cognizer is the second moment of a yogic direct perceiver directly realizing selflessness of a person. So maybe in that case, it's different than other
Why?
yogic perceptions. I don't know. I'm just curious if
Mm.
it's something.
Oh, because I haven't even read this part. Yeah, an example of a yogi subsequent cognizer is the second moment of a yogi direct perceiver directly realizing selflessness of person. I mean, the only thing I could think of would maybe be in the Prasangika school or in the higher schools, talking about emptiness, that this refers in particular to a meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness directly, that is in each moment a valid cognition. It could also be that. Because here is the selflessness of person in the Sautrantika school, and they don't accept that kind of valid cognition. They don't accept this non-dual mind that you would have in the Prasangika school or even in the Chittamatra. So Chittamatra and Madhyamika school both accept emptiness. And accepting emptiness, therefore, they also took of a meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness, which is a non-dual mind, a non-dual wisdom. So maybe in that case, every moment is asserted to be a valid cognition. Yeah, I have to go back to my notes. I don't know now, but it's so clear in my mind that it has to be. So that may just be in the Sautrantika school. Yeah. An example of a mental direct one is the second moment. Yeah, there's no such subsequence of cognizer in the continuum of an ordinary being because mental direct perceivers apprehending forms and so forth are only one smallest moment. And that's for ordinary beings, awareness as to which an object appears but is not ascertained. Oh, that is going back to this weird, I don't want to say weird mental direct perceiver, but that particular one that is asserted by some of the Sautrantikas that say, for instance, that between a direct perception, a direct sense consciousness, and a conceptual mind, there's that very short moment of direct perception. And that is too short. It's too short to actually be able to know its object. Therefore, it's an awareness to which the object appears, but it's not ascertained. It cannot be a subsequent cognizer. A mental subsequent cognizer, which does exist in the continuum of some ordinary beings, is the second moment of a clairvoyant consciousness knowing another's mind. An ordinary being, does an ordinary being have clairvoyance?
To the concentration state.
Are there some who have naturally clairvoyance?
Maybe, yeah.
Who are they?
I mean, there are people who can see ghosts and stuff, no, without any as children already.
Right. So yeah, you could call that maybe a clairvoyant ability. I mean, but is there a species of beings that naturally always have clairvoyance?
No.
Well, the intermediate state, the Pardo beings are said to have natural clairvoyance. They do have certain, what we would call as humans, like a clairvoyant ability as Pardo beings. Have you heard of that? The intermediate state beings, that they have this inborn kind of ability, certain abilities. Of course, clairvoyance, what does that even mean? What does it even mean? I mean, from the point of view of a human being, a dolphin would be clairvoyant because they hear sounds in the water that we could never perceive, right? I mean, clairvoyance is always in relation to one person. You would say they're clairvoyant, and then from the point of view of another person, not. I mean, from a dolphin's point of view, it's not a big deal that you can see things in a particular way. Or an intermediate state being, like, how much do they really know? How strong is their clairvoyance? And yeah, anyway, that's a whole different debate. Yeah, Tripti, go ahead.
When we were very young, it used to be repeated that when dogs howl in the night,
It's a clairvoyant sound that indicates something bad is about to happen.
The Tibetans have exactly the same.
I think it comes from the same
So when they're
source.
howling around, then everyone's shh, try to calm the dog down. Someone is gonna die or something. Uh, and of course someone is gonna die somewhere, anywhere, somewhere in the world, someone is gonna die. But yeah, I know. I mean, in Germany we also have these superstitions, different things. I don't know. I think my grandmother used to say like when an owl is howling or whatever an owl does, then someone is going to die. She thought it was terrible. Like, but I mean, of course, someone is going to die. Or other things, a mirror breaks and like 7 years of bad luck and stuff. I think that's yeah, those are just superstitions. I think. Who knows? Maybe the dogs. I mean, what I do believe is when there's an earthquake about to happen, that some animals pick
Yeah.
up on that earlier.
Yeah.
They get very nervous. They just try to run away, like some of the wild animals or even dogs. I've heard from people who lived through strong earthquakes, who said that the animals seem to have picked up on that. In fact, a Tibetan friend of mine, he was in that huge earthquake in Tibet. That was one of the strongest earthquakes ever felt, apparently. And it was during Losar, and he was sent by his family to go to the stables because the animals were so restless. And so as he walked over, this huge earthquake struck, and he was outside, and his entire family was killed. He was the only survivor. Like they're out there in the cold. He was the only person surviving, and they were trapped in the house actually for days. But oh, terrible story. Anyway, but he said he was sent out. I never forget. He was sent to go to the stables to check on the animals because they were so restless just before the earthquake struck. So is that clairvoyance? I mean, depends how you define it. From our perspective, it's a special ability. And clairvoyance can be inborn. Clairvoyance can be, as you said, developed through meditative concentration, for instance. It can be as a karmic result from a past life. You've had clairvoyance in the previous life. Maybe you have had developed these deep states of concentration, and these have degenerated, but that ability of knowing certain things has remained. As like some people, like you were mentioning, Anastasia, like some people having certain abilities, like seeing ghosts or something, or being able to see in the future. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so here they're direct perceptions. They're definitely direct perceivers. Being clairvoyant and knowing another's mind, for instance. An example of a self-knowing subsequent cognizer is the second moment of a self-knower, which is experiencing a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form. And an example of a yogi subsequent cognizer is the second moment of a yogi direct perceiver directly realizing the selflessness of the person. Okay, all right, we're done. I mean, time is up. Okay, how much do we have left? I didn't think we were going to get that far. I haven't even read this part yet. So I'll read it until tomorrow because maybe again we can leave out some bits here. Oof, there's a lot here, and we could just jump and go right into direct perceivers. That would be the last one, and that requires again, I mean, we need to go. Ooh, it's quite a lot in mind in Tibetan Buddhism. Even in science and philosophy, it's quite long. Yep, I'll look through it and then jump over a few things. Okay, great. So let's
Shall
wrap
we,
it up.
shall we read something? Any homework?
Oh yes. Oh, absolutely. Please read the subsequent cognizers, the entire part of the subsequent cognizers, and start with direct perception in science and philosophy. So most important would be to continue reading on the subsequent cognizers because if tomorrow I jump over a few things, at least you've read it. At least you've read it, and if you have questions, you're welcome to ask if there's something not clear. But then I would also like to start with direct perception, and that's so therefore, if you could read the whole 4 pages, 3.5 pages in science and philosophy in preparation, that would be great. Okay.
Having thoroughly investigated all that I heard today and night through the four listenings, mind-born of reflection on these topics, contemplation, may this discernment sever all doubts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you find out before we